Thucydides Trap is a term used to describe the occurrences of an emerging power rising and threatening to displace an existing great power as a regional or international dominant leader. A study performed by Harvard professor Allison showed 12 of 16 past cases in which a rising power has confronted a ruling power, and the result has been warfare and catastrophic conflict. Now, in recent times, the expected next case will be the United States and China, with the current trajectory of both nations' paths expected to collide in the next decade or so. World War I provides an example of what can happen only 100 years ago. In early 1914, very few people could have contemplated the slaughter that would soon unfold, and a new term was even introduced to somehow describe it: World War. The war ended only after 4 years of pure carnage and annihilation, leaving the previously all-powerful European continent in ruins. The German kaiser was gone, the Russian tsar overthrown, the Austro-Hungarian Empire dissolved, and the warring parties losing a whole youth generation through an early death from the mass slaughter. Over the past 1,000 years until this point, the European continent had been the most important political and powerful center in the world, but within only few years, due to the First World War, came to a sudden end. The Thucydides Trap is named after the ancient Athenian historian and military general Thucydides, which theorized that the Peloponnesian War between Athens and Sparta had been inevitable because of Spartan fears of the growth of Athenian power. As Athens challenged Sparta in ancient Greece, or as the German Empire did to the British Empire a century ago. In 12 of the 16 cases over the past 500 years, the result was war. But for when the parties managed to avoid conflict, it required significant and challenging adjustments in attitudes and actions from both parties. When a rising power is threatening to displace a ruling power, a minor crisis that should be contained, like the assassination of the Archduke Ferdinand in Sarajevo in 1914, which ignited the start of World War I, can escalate and trigger severe reactions which should not occur during normal times. Thucydides wrote in the 5th century BC, Athens had emerged over a half-century as a leader of civilization, bearing advances in philosophy, history, drama, architecture, democracy, and naval prowess. This shocked Sparta, which for a century had been the leading land power on the Peloponnese Peninsula. As Thucydides saw it, Athens's position was understandable. As its clout grew, so too did its self-confidence, its consciousness of past injustices, its sensitivity to instances of disrespect, and its insistence that previous arrangements be revised to reflect new realities of power. Sparta interpreted the Athenian posture as unreasonable, ungrateful, and threatening to the system it had established, which Athens had prospered. The Peloponnesian War broke out, and by the time it ended 30 years later, Sparta was the token victor. However, both states lay in absolute ruin, leaving Greece vulnerable to the Persian invasions to follow a generation later. 8 years before the outbreak of World War in Europe, Britain's King Edward VII asked his Prime Minister why the British government was becoming so unfriendly to his nephew Kaiser Wilhelm II's Germany, rather than keeping its eye on America, which he saw as the greater challenge. The Prime Minister instructed the Foreign Office's chief Germany watcher, Herr Crow, to write a memo answering the King's question. Crow delivered his memorandum on New Year's Day, 1907. The logic of Crow's analysis echoed Thucydides' insight. Did increasing hostility between Britain and Germany stem more from German capabilities or German conduct? Crow put it a bit differently. Did Germany's pursuit of political hegemony and maritime ascendancy pose an existential threat to the independence of her neighbors and ultimately the existence of England? 3 years after Crow's memo, King Edward VII passed away. Attendees at his funeral included 2 chief mourners, Edward's successor, George V, and Germany's Kaiser Wilhelm, along with President Roosevelt representing the United States. At one point, Roosevelt asked Wilhelm whether he would consider a cessation in the German-British naval arms race. The Kaiser replied that Germany was steadfastly committed to having a powerful navy, and he explained, "War between Germany and Britain was simply unthinkable, because I was brought up in England, very largely. I feel myself partly an Englishman. Next to Germany, I care more for England than for any other country." And emphasized, "I adore England." However, as history proves, that unimaginable conflict, no matter how catastrophic for all parties involved, even with strong cultural empathy for each other, and economically interdependent the states may be, Still, none of these circumstances is enough to prevent war, with 1914 as a great example. The table shows the instance of a ruling power versus a rising power and the end outcome, either war or a peaceful transition. 12 of 16 cases over the last 500 years of a rising power threatening to displace a ruling state, the result was war. The basis of rising power and ruling power is on fast movements in relative GDP and military strength. When a rising, revolutionary France challenged Britain's dominance of the oceans and the balance of power on the European continent, Britain destroyed Napoleon Bonaparte's fleet in 1805 and later sent troops to the continent to defeat his armies in Spain and at the Battle of Waterloo. When Otto von Bismarck sought to unify the German states, war with the common foe, France, proved to be a popular idea to support for the people with a unified Germany. With the Meiji Restoration in 1868, a rapidly modernizing Japanese economy with advancing military institution challenged Chinese and Russian dominance of East Asia, resulting in conflict with both nations, from which the Japan Empire emerged as the new leading power in the region. Now, with China's ascendance and the impact it will have on the current US-led international order, which until now has provided unprecedented peace and prosperity for the past 70 years since the end of World War II. As Singapore's founding father, Lee Kuan Yew, observed, the size of China's displacement of the world balance is such that the world must find a new balance. It is not possible to pretend that this is just another big player. This is the biggest player in the history of the world. Everyone knows about the rise of China but yet do not understand the potential consequences from this on a geopolitical level. Never in history has a nation risen so far, so fast, in so many ways. The former Czech President Václav Havel said, "All this has happened so rapidly that we have not yet had time to be astonished." Thank you for watching and do not forget to like and subscribe.